Welcome to Trash Talk, a podcast by Zero Waste Canada. I'm your host, Alistair McCallum. I moved to Canada in 2017 from England, and I've since held a variety of roles in the waste industry, and currently sit on the Zero Waste Canada board. On this podcast, we will dive deep into the world of zero waste and the circular economy, speaking with change makers who are helping to lead us to a more waste-free, sustainable planet. All right, Trash Talk is back for the second episode of March. Gerald Grant is joining us. Welcome to the show.
Very, very pleased to be here. Thanks, Alistair.
Yeah, no worries. So you've been in waste for a while. Tell us about your kind of waste journey and waste background and
So fell into the waste industry actually by accident. Back in the early 90s, the provincial government at the time put some major cuts through to the provincial workforce. So all these professionals that had been in the Ministry of Environment, Ministry of Natural Resources, et cetera, were all let go, most of them on packages. So they all entered the same environmental space that I was as a recent graduate from U of T, and there was nothing. There was nothing. I wanted to get into water resource management. I'd done all the freshwater bio and all that stuff, and it seemed like a really good place to, nope, terrible place to go. So I ended up running into somebody that said, you need to go and volunteer at the Recycling Council of Ontario. So I did. So once, twice a week, I would take my scooter, my old Vespa, or not Vespa, sorry, Elite 150, take it down to College Street and got to know the folks that were running the RCO and did that for about 6 months and then spun that into an opportunity to work for a small waste company in Brampton, a facility on Wentworth Court. It was originally owned by a company called Cougar and Conwaste, and they were the transfer station operation. And anyway, that became my first waste industry experience that sort of over the course of the next couple of years catapulted into a corporate waste experience with BFI, the old BFI, Browning Ferris Industries, down in Windsor, did that for 2 years. Then in Toronto with BFI for 2 years. WM bought BFI because the industry is one of accumulating, consolidating business, right?
yeah.
And so WM bought Canada's BFI operating assets, and I went along with them. So I became a waste management employee for 5 years until there were some changes, and I moved along again. Ended up as a sales manager at what became BFI Canada. Did that for a couple of years, and then I said, time to do something on my own. On my own became a partnership with an old friend who I worked with at WM, Nancy Moran, and the two of us ran Spinnaker Recycling for the next 12 years, which we spun into a consultancy that was specializing in multi-residential. We became the go-to for the Greater Toronto Apartment Association, the Federation of Rental Providers Ontario. We did a lot of work with CFAA, which is the Canadian Federation of Apartment Associations, as it was called back in the day. Became the subject matter experts in multi-res.
Mm.
Also, a waste audit business and a little bit of a brokerage business. Spun that into a sale of the business in 2019. Back to WM for another adventure with WM. Did that for 3 years. And when that arrangement came to an end, I decided to start Innovate Waste Solutions, which is where I am now, working with some of the same people that I have for the past many, many years. Well, lots of people. I mean, the haulers,
Yeah.
you name it, consultants, etc. So that's how I end up here today. Once again, subject matter expert, multi-res, subject matter expert, waste audit, and a few other specialties along the way. There you
Awesome.
go.
Yeah. A lot of touch points in waste. Great. Yeah. Great experience to share with us there. It's funny you said you kind of fell into waste. That's kind of a common theme on the podcast of other guests too. No one kind of plans to be in it, but then once you're in, and that's kind of it, right? So it's kind of funny to hear that you're saying that as well. And yeah, like same here and same for other guests as well. So it's kind of
Right.
a
Interesting.
common theme with waste industry
Yeah.
people. Yeah. Awesome. Yeah. So let's kind of talk about your kind of current like business and stuff like that right now. So you're involved kind of hands-on with audits you said earlier on. So maybe can you
Yeah.
go into a bit more detail on that? Like what trends are you seeing with waste audits? and kind of what actions you having with your clients on actioning reduction?
Right. Well, it's an interesting time in Ontario in particular because there has been so little enforcement on the audit side
Mm,
that it's only those that are truly wanting to be compliant with their ISO 14001 grader with that certification where there's any real impetus. There's a little bit here, a little bit there, especially with I think the hotel space is starting to pay attention a little bit more because Green Keys got a bit of a foothold as a accreditation tool. But overall, it's been kind of stagnant
mm,
in terms of action, in my opinion. Yeah, those that have to do it, do it. Those that don't have to do it, those that should do it, well. Um, in terms of trends, there is definitely a trend towards more attention paid to food waste, which is good.
yeah,
And very, very often, the levers in these things do come down very often to what's the cost? Like what's the cost of doing business when it relates to waste? And be it carbon cost or be it actual cost. And so the emergence of food waste reduction technologies, like that side of things, it's interesting to see that developing.
mm,
Especially with some homegrown solutions like Food Cycler, really taking steps, making strides into the commercial space as well as the single family home, which also does convert over into multi-res a little bit. So it's good to see that. More international players like Harp, obviously they've got a strong foothold in the commercial side as well. But anyway, just it's nice to see some attention being paid. Food waste is the worst actor, if you will,
yeah,
in a lot of operations. Um, to watch, especially in the institutional space, and while it's not universally done, a lot of the contract providers on the food and bev side of things are starting to pay real attention to waste from waste from process, right? Like they're really measuring out what is pulled out in the prep side of things.
mm,
They're measuring out what doesn't get eaten. And so they're adjusting portion sizes and things like that. So there are some steps that do show up in the waste audits. I would say institutionally, the most visible change would definitely be the emergence of reusables.
yeah.
I don't know if you've had any of the folks from any of the reusables
I've
platforms.
had them all on. Yeah.
You have them all on. Okay,
Yeah.
great. So the folks at Be It Friendly or Muse, who are the two that I have run into the most,
Mm,
um, it's so good to see those platforms gaining some real traction
yeah.
in the marketplace. Segue. It's a shame we don't have deposit return everywhere else, but we can get into that a bit more.
Mm,
But to see that taking hold institutionally and now starting to take hold in within the retail environment, great. I mean, there were a couple of players that toyed with Loop a couple of years ago, and that unfortunately didn't gain enough steam. It didn't have enough, I don't think, local Canadian you know, energy behind it.
mm,
These other things really do. Not that Muse is Canadian, but their operations are very, very Canadian.
yeah.
Um, but yeah. So anyway, those are the things really that I'm seeing. What's next? What's next? Um, Getting them also to pay attention to unit counts. I'm giving this up. I shouldn't be giving this up, but with the process so many places don't do inventory. They don't take inventory into consideration truly. And you
Mm,
doing zero waste, that whole zero waste audit, those are the sort of things you need to pay attention to.
mm,
It's your inventory that you're coming to take, pay attention to the inventories that you're bringing in and how does that relate to your waste, right? How can you eliminate cost upstream and apply it effectively? Best way to do that is to understand what your unit counts are.
yeah.
So got into that a bit. That's a trend which I've had a lot of positive feedback from a lot of end users of our services around those details. When you can start talking about, 3 million single use receptacle, containers being used over in a facility or a campus or a whatever portfolio. When you start talking about those sort of numbers, it gives so much more reason
Yeah.
for stuff, if you will.
Yeah,
So
it's a really good point to raise. Like in work, similar things going on discussion wise with clients on procurement. So you're paying essentially twice for those items to one to bring them onto site and one to remove them via recycling, whether it is or trash or compost, right? So if you're cutting that cost at the top, then you aren't paying as much to remove it at the bottom, right? So it's a good point to bring up in terms of there's money in waste, and if you can take waste out the loop at the start, then you spend less at the bottom as well. So anyway, it's a good point to raise. I think it's a very it's a key point that isn't looked at enough, I would say.
yeah.
So, yeah, good.
Well, yeah, I don't know if you know my catch line is taking the waste out of garbage.
Mm,
And
there you go. Yeah,
that's what it's talking about. People think, oh, it's a cute tagline, but no, it's about where waste takes so many different forms, right? Within the
yeah,
overall, holistic viewpoint of a business or operation or organization. It's so understanding that better, quantifying it has value. So.
yeah. No,
Those are the things in the audit world that are I think pertinent and somewhat pressing right now. And
yeah.
I would love to see more people taking it seriously as a strategy for understanding what they're doing.
Yeah, I think it's a good way to get data and visuals and action items on waste doing audits. But then, yeah, that you said the key element there is what happens next. Is it
Yeah,
action? Is it not? And yeah, it can be difficult to move
yeah,
things along without kind of corporate buy-in, whatever it is, or stakeholder buy-in. It's difficult to move those items sometimes if they're bigger talking points and require a lot of change, then it can be difficult. Um, on the change topic, let's go back a little bit. So waste audits kind of happen, like when things moving along like quickly, or you want to have like insight into what's happening with your waste programs. But what they highlight often can happen sooner. So infrastructure is a big topic. You and I both know how difficult it is in Ontario with multi-res. So what are some things to think about if you're designing a building, and how can you incorporate waste earlier to avoid those headaches that audits may find later on?
yeah. So multi-res um, it's such a fantastic use of space, right? Like being able to stack residential spaces and have common amenities, which are so amazing. And you walk into a lot of these new buildings, and the amenities that are available to people are just outrageous, fantastic. Um, when it comes to the waste side of things, too many people are looking at waste through that same lens of, oh, well, you've got to have the amenity
Mm,
with respect to waste. And that's the way that it gets sold internally, is that you have to have this to be competitive in the marketplace, be it as a condo or a rental, that you need to have this amenity on every floor in order to get people, you know, to buy or rent in a space. Um, I disagree. I disagree because it's just what people are used to. And
mm,
I'll tangent a little bit here. I'll say, why are we only motivating shoot systems within structures of systems like TGS, like Toronto Green Standard in Toronto, right? Like that is what is motivated, is to put in shoot infrastructure. And if it's a super tall, there's obviously there's no way of getting away from some means of conveyance
mm.
through a super tall building. but we're the majority of buildings, let's call them 30 stories, 35 stories. People are moving through these buildings all the time anyway. Why are we not taking that movement, using that movement to the advantage of waste strategies? And the reason I say that is because when people are walking into a chute intake room, they walk into that chute intake room anonymously. Nobody is tracking behavior. Nobody is there's no opportunity for engagement the way things are set up, and nobody wants to pay the money to set things up so that you could engage,
Yeah.
which is the not yet anyway. I've talked to people, but nobody wants to spend the money. So the only way to take away from all those things and then create a single, I'll call it a funnel of the behavior is to remove the chute, go to what some like to call a diversion lounge rather than a garbage space.
Yeah.
Give it a fancy name and entice people into that space to do the right thing through engagement tools. So you've got that opportunity. You've got fobs in buildings, or you've got people with RFID on their phones, or whatever it is, near field communications on their phones. Whatever there's so many ways to be able to manage and track people's behaviors as it relates to these things, and then be able to do all the things that I talk about and you talk about, I'm sure, is creating that engagement strategy where
Mm.
you can key in on those that are performing and those that aren't performing in different ways.
Yeah.
They're part of a community. So there is that. I don't want to get into the potential punitive side of that, if you want to call it punitive. But it does create a situation. And if I do what I do and tangent off into the other direction, which is what if we go deposit return in Ontario? What if? Well, there's going to be a heck of a lot of materials lost down those three streams, down the tri-sorter single chute. A lot of material lost for all those people that live in that multi-res building. There's no opportunity because there is often not a big enough communal space for people to go to actually deposit things. And you have to
Mm.
be able to justify infrastructure in spaces. You have to be able to justify space
Yeah.
in buildings to do these things. So you have to, if you understand the very, very great likelihood of these changes to waste management strategies over the course of the next, it could be another 10 years, but let's just understand that the rest of the world is going there. We're going to end up going there eventually, especially when the current shift does not seem to be meeting the needs of the end users. So yeah, there's a lack of thought going into the infrastructure, and there's also not enough understanding of the cost benefit piece. When you look at how much it costs to build in chute infrastructure, be it the chutes themselves, be it the electrical, be it the room in which it is housed. I've put and if somebody wants to reach out to me on this, please do. I've put together a spreadsheet that spells this all out because I understand what it costs to clean a chute twice a year because you should be doing that. I understand what it costs to go to every one of these chute intake rooms every day to make sure people haven't dropped stuff in there and possibly clean it every day, which you should
Yeah.
be doing. All those pieces to the puzzle, but it's the opportunity cost of those square feet that people do not figure into that equation, which I have chosen to do, that it gives you an idea of what the ongoing implications. Look at a rental building. Those are rentable square feet that are costing instead of becoming a source of revenue.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of waste spreadsheets. So yeah, good shout out there to your
Yeah.
shoot spreadsheet there. On shoots as well, I want to just yeah that point you mentioned about like space and rent opportunity. Former colleagues of mine made that same point. They want to use that space for something different than a waste shoot. And no one wants them. Like, yeah, again, former colleagues like always mentioned they were jammed constantly. maintenance. You mentioned that before as well. So the cost of having a shoot it just isn't worth the time from not just a like waste point of view for us. It's operationally not efficient either, and there's no way around it. From what I understand, still to kind of yeah move to a more yeah zero waste mindset or like copy the
Right.
West Coast where we have tall buildings in BC, but there's no chutes in them. People
Right.
come down to the waste room with their recycling and organics kind of separated, and diversion rates there are many times higher than they are in Ontario for a good reason. But anyway,
Absolutely.
we can go on that all day, I think. But yeah, there's lots of good takeaways there in terms of designing stage and how waste isn't yeah being thought of enough in that planning phase. And again, yeah, with shoots, there's many reasons why they aren't working, but here we are
Hmm.
still discussing them, and there's no end in sight to regulations on them. But anyway, we'll leave that for the
I'll give a
podcast.
little shout out to Concert Properties from BC, who
Yep.
has followed, that design aesthetic, if you will, with their buildings in Toronto, and it's been great
Okay.
to see. I'll give you, and here's the funny story on that. A Toronto ops manager guy, right, who was an experienced, very experienced within the space of buildings with shoots. When he first went there, it was, oh, this is crazy. I don't know how this is going to happen. How is this going to work? Is it going to be yeah.
Mm.
6 months later, it was 6 months later, it was the complete change of opinion, which was
Okay.
this is great.
Well,
So,
what I think too, like kind of like same topic here, but a bit different. But I think you mentioned community earlier on. I think I want to see a way where there can be more rewards for diversion. So
mhm.
let's say like water, like that's charged, per unit, but waste isn't, for example, right? So what there's a way to, charge, waste like portions per unit, and then if you divert more, the building cost would be less in that example because you haven't got as much like higher cost trash. You're diverting more into organics and recycling, and then your waste, metering cost comes down per month. Let's say if you're diverting more collectively as a building, is there a way to do that? Possibly, I don't really know, but yeah, we'll see if that's the
That's
future.
the yeah, it's a slippery slope. I mean, because you have the mechanism with submetering of
Yeah,
water or electricity. That's easy to do in a multi-res building,
yeah,
be it condo or rental. But on the waste side of things, yeah, what is it? Is it by weight or is it by
yeah.
volume? And how do we
Measuring is
measure that?
yeah,
Is it by
yeah,
the bag? Well, how big is a bag?
yeah.
Right?
Or
So
wait, yeah, exactly. Yeah, just yeah.
it's a really challenging one to work with. I do think that, let's say, the engagement, like I mentioned, about being able to engage people based on their behavior, at
Mm,
least gives you the number of uses of those various streams. So you can make some assumptions, at least at that point. You know, Unit 234 hasn't used the recycling chute all month.
mm.
What's going on here? Why? Is there a problem? They understand what, like, anyway, at least you've got a mechanism, not to be, as I mentioned, punitive, but to certainly to incent on the positive side of things.
Yeah, yeah.
And,
Good point. Yeah.
to your point, like reward, yeah, gift certificate. I don't know, something. There's got to be ways, but that's the toughest part of it to truly be able to manage. As I say,
Yeah,
you need to be able.
it is tough. Yeah, like to get waste data in any example is difficult. So yeah, to measure it for a building, I guess, yeah,
Mhm.
could be in the future, but possibly, yeah, like it could be a diversion target per building, and then there's a yeah kind of get together or a festival or something. I don't know, like a zero waste festival where there's gift cards given out if you can get to a certain diversion rate as a building collectively. But anyway,
Right.
there's
There are so many challenging aspects of, yeah,
Mm-mm.
in 15 years of really specializing in multi-res now,
Yeah.
17 years. Oh my goodness, 17 years. Um, those all of those things are challenging because there are lease agreements, right? For when you get
Mm,
into that type of thing. In the condo world, you would think it would work, but again, most of those unit owners don't want to be measured and
yeah.
managed. Like
Yeah.
unfortunately we as a society, generally speaking, we haven't adopted since 1984, 5, when deposit return disappeared for cans, bottles, and glass in Ontario for anything but booze because of Blue Box. There might have been a reason for that to be sponsored. But anyway, because that infrastructure is difficult to manage. Not as difficult now because everything's so much more electronic and the
Yeah.
materials are all lightweighted. So you've got all kinds of other opportunities for better scaling of those return protocols. But no, it's yeah, it's tough. It's tough.
Yeah, good topic, but we'll see what happens in the future, where this could go if there is an
Yeah.
engagement strategies that land well. But I think it's just difficult. People like I guess for me, I'm zero waste minded. So I look at my trash and recycling and try to
Mm.
divert what I can. But yes, like people just maybe aren't as interested or invested in that. And I get it. It's a low item on people's lists when there's a lot of things going on. So
It's
fully
unfortunate.
understand. So you mentioned DRS earlier on. I'm just curious on anything else you would love to see change regulation-wise, to help move the needle on diversion and just generally engagement strategies. Like what needs to happen like tomorrow to really help the cause of zero waste in Ontario.
Yeah,
Big
seeing,
question.
yeah, it's a big question. As I say, the most important thing would be for government actors to actually pay attention to the space
Mm,
and understand that, like, and everybody will say, oh, EPR is the way to go, EPR is the way to go. And EPR in certain sectors has worked quite well. Um, but when it comes to a lot of materials, we need to look at things through the lens of no, it's both the consumer and the producer that need to be responsible. It needs to be a shared responsibility model at the individual level. So going back to the DRS is kind of the foundational piece of that. You need to do the same thing for other materials. Um, but you get into people don't want to spend the money to manage all that stuff. We even the pushback on the e-waste, people buying a TV and having to pay $5 for the end of life processing of the TV. Um, you know, yeah, it's if we don't, and as I say, if we don't see at the governmental level, and this is where, that 9% number for plastic recycling, which seems to be such a universal norm,
mm,
um, when we knowing what we're doing have been doing at the municipal level is still only contributing to a 9% number at the end of the day, holistically across that plastic stream. Okay, where's the 81%? Sorry, 91%. Where's the 91%? Sorry about my math. Where's that 91% being lost?
mm,
And why are we not holding more actors to account on that quite definitively? And I know there's the Canada Plastics Pact, all these different things. But at the end of the day, I'm sorry, but the majority of actors in that space like the idea of that material being a fodder for RDF and refuse derived fuel and stuff like that.
mm.
Because it still suits the economics of plastic to use virgin stock, right?
Yeah. And
Which is my
there's
concern on the current state of affairs in Ontario with the exemptions for materials moving forward. So that 9% number is the biggest one that we need to tackle, and nobody seems willing to do so. And it's a bunch of things, right? Like I was saying at the beginning about there's been no enforcement on waste audits,
Yeah.
which if you go back to the original intent of the 3 R's regs, which had continuous improvement components built into it, right? So when you go there and you realize that we've had a tool in place for 30 plus years, that just because we haven't been using it means that we're now 30 years behind.
Mm.
Not everybody, but a lot of organizations that would have been on the right path, which would have created, I believe, a much stronger dynamic in Ontario around good materials, having good product generated at all the commercial levels, um, to push through, better recycling infrastructure in Ontario altogether. Because it's always been a question of quality of product and the amount of product to be able to then justify infrastructure
Yeah.
versus shipping it out overseas. Because it was a mess, right? It's not clean, therefore we're going to ship it overseas until we stopped. But then we didn't have anything domestically. And there's some good players. We know there's really good players that are handling a lot of good plastics. We just don't have enough of them.
Mm.
So,
Yeah.
yeah, what do we need? There's a few things we need, but we need active government support of existing legislation to start with, I think, which
Yeah.
I'm sorry is not a very, you know, yeah, I'm sorry. You got to manage. You can't manage some of these things if you don't measure them.
Yeah, no, yeah, really good point. I think what we're seeing in Ontario especially is that the government actors or those who are like in the ear of the government have a lot of say. And yeah, you mentioned before like rolling back some key targets and DRS was in talks for many years and it was kind of getting closer and then it was taken away again, and then there's just like yeah, vested interests at play as well. And then we're seeing a shift to incineration more so in Ontario now as well. So there's interests at play that don't take into account zero waste or even public health in that example of
Right.
incineration there as well. So there's lots to go up against, and the trend even nationally it's not moving in the right way overall towards zero waste, just based on what I'm hearing from
Yeah.
BC, who are meant to be like the gold standard of this. Yeah, they're seeing similar impacts and rollbacks on
Right.
policy. So it's yeah, tough time to be in the zero waste space. But there
Yeah.
is hope. There are things going on that are great. Like you mentioned reuse earlier on the
Yeah.
podcast as well. So there's things happening that are great on the ground. But then yeah, you mentioned 9%. Like yeah, how can we move that needle? And it's a big number to attack. But there's yeah, lots that needs to happen. And like I was saying, government action right now isn't advancing enough on that front to move that
Yeah.
needle properly. So
Yeah. Frustrating.
yeah.
Just a
Yeah,
little.
just
Yeah.
to close off then our kind of time is coming
Oh,
down.
absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
just wanted to ask, yeah, if anyone interested in your services or what you offer as a business, where can they go to find out more and reach out to you if what they wanted to, yeah.
Yeah, well, I'm on LinkedIn a fair bit under, well, Gerald Grant, Wasteman GG. I've been on there for forever. I'm one of the OG LinkedIn guys.
Yep.
And but also innovatewaste.ca is the website. I've got an Innovate page on LinkedIn as well. So Innovate Waste Solutions is where I am, and people can always call me at 647-882-7723.
Awesome. Thanks so much for the chat and discussion. Lots of great points, and I'm sure we'll chat again about trash in the future. Yeah.
Oh, no doubt, Alistair. Appreciate the time and the opportunity. Thanks so much for
Thanks.
the invite.